Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 79. And this episode, we are joined by Manny Perez, the community manager at Bethesda. Manny, it's so nice to have you here.
Hello. Thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, this is awesome. I'm very honored.
We're very excited. I met Manny at PAX East, which was only 2 months ago.
I think it was closer to about 6 years ago, but you know.
Something like that.
Time is
several
fast.
eons.
Like Manny and I got on really great pretty much from the start, but I feel like we've had a friendship that spans eons just because it feels like we met forever ago at this point.
Yeah, totally.
Because of how time has been passing.
Exactly.
But I was introduced to Manny through the folks at SDGC, which is a friend podcast of this podcast, and so ever since we met, I've wanted to get you on the show, especially once you told me you were a community manager, because I want to start incorporating conversations into this podcast about the stuff other than just holding a controller, right? Like gaming is important on so many levels, but like I wanted to get the conversation around development and community management and all of that stuff going as well. So I guess let's start by, if you could, Manny, just tell the folks a little bit about what you do at Bethesda and if there are specific games that you focus your work with for the community management, that too, just kind of give folks a little background.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you guys mentioned, I'm one of the community managers at Bethesda. I started, this is my point of reference. I started 2 days before Fallout 76 came out. So that was November of, 2018. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah, so I've been with Bethesda for a little over a year. And I started the first game I worked on was Rage 2. And that was a lot of fun. And then I also worked on Wolfenstein Youngblood and most recently Doom Eternal. So yeah, it's been kind of a whirlwind first year and a half. But it's been super fun, man, and I'm still learning a ton, and I work with some pretty remarkable people, so it's a fun place to be.
Fantastic.
Well, and the community at Bethesda specifically is pretty wild because there are so many great games that have a large following, especially Doom Eternal, which, following up Doom 2016, which I recently played and talked about on the show, the Slayers Club is this huge thing, and I would have never anticipated that in 2016 and in 2020, a first-person shooter would have a community like this. Not that first-person shooters don't, but I feel like the Slayers Club is super unique to what other shooters do for their communities.
For sure. It's super. The Slayers Club is super interesting. Like, I remember really early talks about what the Slayers Club was going to look like and what our ideas were for it. And it was just this huge, like, unwieldy thing. It was just like this massive idea. And like, frankly, from my perspective, I was like terrified because this was like, after working on Rage and Wolfenstein, I knew Doom was going to be huge. And I knew, obviously like the cachet that the Doom name comes with is like massive. And so we had this like beautiful big idea, and it was terrifying. I was like, how will this even work? And especially, the whole website, the Slayers Club is like gamified, right? So like everything you do earns points, whether it's like reading an article or posting or submitting fan art or sharing an article, and you get those points to essentially translate to like digital in-game rewards. And that's no easy task from like a tech perspective, and just logistically, it's kind of a nightmare. And so, even simple things like how are you going to have people submit fan art? Like, it was just these crazy conversations and these meetings that went on for hours and hours. But it is unique and it's really, really cool. And I'm just so happy with the way, especially the Slayers Club has turned out. And it's been a tremendous, tremendous game to work on.
I can imagine. And well, especially since Doom, at like all of the games that you've mentioned, it's like, well, Wolfenstein has a history, Rage 2, like everything's a sequel, everything's something stepped into. But Doom in particular has been a series that has been run by fans in so many ways, from the WADs of way back when, and the joke that Doom's on everything because people just need to play it.
Right.
How has making an official landing page for such a strong fan community, was there ever any sort of like, we don't want it to be official, like?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think like the Slayers Club is like a really cool hybrid of like, it's, managed by us, it's managed by the community team and the brand team and Bethesda, but largely it's built by, the community. Like without them, none of the content would be there, whether it's the fan art or whether it's, the articles that we put up. Like most of it is sourced from what happens in the community, whether it's like, oh, we passed a certain milestone in the game or something. And so it's this really cool, like, I don't know, like I almost called it like a Frankenstein kind of website, but like that gives it like a negative connotation, but it's awesome. It's like this like crazy, like we kind of like, cobbled it together with the community. And you're right. I mean, like with a legacy like Doom, you have to include that concept in every conversation. And so everything from, what do we want to put on the box art to like, what do we want to, what do we want the homepage of the Slayers Club to look like? Every conversation is essentially segmented into, okay, how do we welcome new people to the Doom community? How do we welcome more modern first-person shooter fans? But also, how do we like thank and cater to the fans that have been there since 1993? How do we make sure that those core fans are also included in this celebration? And it was cool because it coincided. Last year was the 25th anniversary of Doom, and so it was just this wild like. It's just a celebration of a really tremendous franchise, and there's so many different people coming at it from so many different angles. So it was just, it's always a part of the conversation. How do we make sure that everyone has a piece, has a part to play in this celebration?
That's really awesome. Before we move on to more about your gaming background, I did want to ask, since I know we've talked about this off mic, how did you guys in the office feel about the incredible crossover that gave us all life over the last 3 or 4 months of Isabel and Doom Guy, and the crossover between Animal Crossing and Doom? Was it just as enjoyed in the office as it was for the community?
1000%. It was so appreciated, and just I mean, like, this is, it's the same thing that everybody says, but like they're such different games and there's such different vibes. And you would think that there's such different player bases and communities, but like there's so much overlap there, as we've seen. And so it's just been like this awesome, like just adorable, it's just like a cool celebration. Again, like so much of community work in general is celebrating, right? Celebrating like the wins and celebrating the community and celebrating these franchises and these titles. And so it was just a cool, like, we didn't even have to like do anything to make it happen. Like the fans just came out of the woodwork. And I mean, obviously since the delay and us pushing to the same date as Animal Crossing. But like after that, it was really just like watching the fans continue the celebration. And it was awesome. Yeah, I loved every second of it, man. It was so cool.
Now, when something like incredible like that comes along, like either the community creates something, a meme shows up, this sort of wonderful opportunity of what fans create, how quickly are you and the rest of the team able to kind of do something with that, turn around on that? Because if it's just one person, a one-person game company, as quick as they can, but with a team and with something as large as Bethesda, how quickly can you work on that?
Yeah, I mean, the community team, it's surprisingly small for the number of titles that we work on and for the kind of the size of the games and the communities that we work on. It's small, and we're definitely all like kind of, especially around launch, launch week and thereafter, we're kind of like all in the trenches and we're trying to help each other out and make sure we get by. It's cool though. Like I think those opportunities of like the meme or that one like viral moment, it's like lightning in a bottle, right? And so I think, especially for a team that has such passionate communities, I think you really do need to like time is kind of the essence, and you do want to kind of capture that moment, so to speak. It's interesting with Animal Crossing just because it is like an official title that's like part of the meme, and so we didn't do anything officially in that capacity just because like we would have to talk to Nintendo and it would be a whole thing and it would turn into a much longer process, but. We kind of celebrate unofficially, so to speak. So, for example, I forget what the tweet was, but I think it was Nintendo tweeted something about a Direct at some point, maybe a month and a half ago. And my manager, Jason, he's so slick with social media. Like the guy is an absolute wizard. and he knows how to be really funny. He responded from the Doom account like, "Will Isabel be there?" And like,
I remember that.
yeah, and like people like just absolutely like melted. Like it was just such a perfect response, and it was timely, and it was, So I think those moments are like, okay, like we can have some fun in this moment. But you're right, like time is important for moments like that, and you totally want to capture those celebrations before they kind of dissipate, for sure.
Well, and I remember you talking. We chatted shortly after. So one of my favorite things that the Doom team did in the lead up to Eternal, even as someone who has yet to play Eternal, I got to get wrapped up in the hype because you guys streamed every day pretty much the week of Doom's release. And like, I remember by the final day, it was you and Jason, right, that was streaming?
It was me and Joshua. Yeah.
Oh, Joshua, yeah. And like, you guys didn't look haggard per se, but you definitely looked like you'd been streaming for long hours, multiple days by the end. But I think that was so cool that you just invited the community in, you gave stuff away, you totally interacted constantly, like you were always reading the Twitch chat. Like things like that must be really important to the community team for the success of games that are coming out. Totally.
And that was an idea I had maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And I sat down with Joshua and I was just like, hey, like, here's this idea. And, I think my initial idea was a little bit different. And we kind of workshopped it into, what ended up being Raise Hell Week. And it was such a cool week. Just like, especially that week, because like that was kind of the start of like everything closing down and everybody kind of like being in their homes. And so it was nice to be able to continue to go to the office and go to the studio to do those streams. But you're right, man. I mean, by that Friday, we were so tired. Because it was just like PAX, and then it was like just 2 weeks of working nonstop. Like I was like working through the weekends, and I was like, going to bed super late. And but it was all for this game. And it's funny, after that last stream on launch day, after the camera cut, Joshua and I stood up, and in complete silence, we didn't say a word. We just immediately shared the longest hug I've ever had. Like it was such a good moment. We just like in this quiet studio, like no one else in the office, just like hugged it out. And we were just like, wow, like that was exhausting, but we felt so good. And it was a really awesome week. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love stories like that. And like that was what was really great about PAX East while I was there. I mean, it helped that I had folks like John Phipps and all of those folks at SDGC to show me around and introduce me to folks. But there was such a sense of camaraderie, at the Discord booth where you were, and even for the booths for the specific games, like everyone was happy to be there.
Yeah.
And that's my favorite part of gaming, right? Is like the community side and like folks really just wanting to celebrate games, because you don't always see that, especially on the internet. A lot of people are quick to say negative things about anything.
Totally.
And as I've told you, like we're here to celebrate the joys of gaming, and that was what was refreshing about meeting folks like you, and I met some folks at Inti Creates and some other folks all over that con that were just excited to talk to fans about the games, and like even everyone at the Discord booth, the other folks that you were working with, like when I finally got my hands on Doom Eternal, like everyone was just like checking in, how do you like the game, what'd you think? Like they don't just kind of just drop you off and let you go, like they let you play the game, but they want to know your thoughts, and I'm guessing that's super important to the community management side of Bethesda, right? Is to like be interactive with the fans and really get to know what they're thinking.
Yeah, it really is. And it's hard to do because those conversations take place in so many different places and platforms. So it can sometimes feel like, you're chasing the conversation. You're like, okay, where can I engage with people? Where can I really get their feedback? But that's ultimately what it comes down to. I usually, when people kind of ask me about my work or my job, I break it into kind of like 2 buckets, and it's like a pre-launch, like leading up to the game, and a lot of that is communicating with the community, but more in like an informative way. So we're giving them trailers, we're getting them really hyped, but we're also explaining some things. Maybe we're streaming some parts of the game to answer some questions. And then, post-launch, it becomes a little bit more of a reactionary process where we're saying, okay, what are the issues? What are the community, what are they seeing and what are they enjoying? What don't they like? And it becomes a little bit, I don't want to say slower, but it just becomes a process of listening and then reacting appropriately. And so that kind of interaction is super important on both sides of launch, for sure.
Awesome. one could assume that since you work for Bethesda and they make a lot of first-person shooter games, that is your favorite type of game. But I know better. I know you play a whole variety of games. But let's start by talking about like your origins with gaming. What was your first game system? What was your first like really passionate game that you loved? Things like that.
That's a good question. I originally started playing on PC when I was probably 6 years old. And actually I want to say my first game, but definitely my first FPS was Wolfenstein 3D on the PC.
Sure. Nice.
Way back. And I just kind of fell in love with gaming, and that it kind of took off from there. I remember we had an NES and an SNES growing up, and I was super into Mortal Kombat. I remember playing that a lot with my brothers and sisters. But I would say like my first like real passion, like when I felt that like, oh man, like video games are something special, I would probably say it was around like the GameCube era. And I remember playing games like Resident Evil 4 and Metal Gear Twin Snakes, specifically on the GameCube. Nice. And I remember just being completely engrossed in everything, the story, and it spoke to me in a way that like art speaks to people, you know what I mean? And so that was really the first time where I was like, oh, okay, like it's not just a pastime, like it's a product and it's a piece of art, and I can enjoy it as such. And I remember sitting in my dad's basement playing the GameCube for hours and hours, like entire days. Like the sun would go up and then back down, and I would still be in this like dimly lit basement. I remember my older brother asking me, "Hey, is that the best game you've ever played?" And I was holding the Twin Snakes GameCube case in my hand, and I remember just like feeling so passionately, like in my heart, I was like, yes, like this is the most amazing thing I've ever done. Like this is incredible. And it kind of took off from there. Yeah, that's kind of where it all started.
That's awesome.
Very nice.
It's always funny to think about the games that like affected us, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't realize it until after the fact when you look back.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely true. And it's hard to appreciate everything in a game as it happens. You know, it's sometimes hard to like take all that in because it's a lot, especially now, right? But yeah, it's hard to not appreciate the games in hindsight, for sure.
True. Are you ever able to go back and play some of those games in whatever spare time you're able to find?
Oh, totally. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I actually just recently I went back and I played some Resident Evil 4, and it's one of my favorite games of all time. You know, with the recent news of a potential remaster, I'm super excited. And then I mean, I have Wolfenstein 3D on a Game Boy of mine, and every now and then it's sitting on my desk at work, and every now and then, you know, whether it's like during lunch or after hours or something, I'll just whip it out, and it just like brings me back. You know, it's like this is how I got started. So it's nice to have. It's nice that like everything is here again. You know, it's a nice little bonus of 2020.
Agreed.
Yeah, I like that we're in an age where gaming has been around long enough that we can come back to older games and like re-release them and remaster them. Like Geoff and I were talking offline about the fact that, you know, as of when we're recording, Final Fantasy Remake has been out for about a week. Like that game existence alone is kind of a shock to my system as a gamer, because that was a very influential game to me growing up. And now I remember watching Advent Children going, oh, imagine if video games looked like that. And now like it looks better than Advent Children. And that just kind of blows me away every time I see it. Yeah,
it's crazy, man. Like and I think culturally too, we're in this super important time in regards to video games where, and it's funny because I think this realization came from the fact that, you know, our parents and the media and stuff, they're starting to realize how much money is made and how much money can be made in this industry.
Right.
But we're at this moment where like, you know, video gamers aren't the like losers. They're not the nerds anymore. You know, like we've sort of like shifted in pop culture and I don't know. It's pretty cool. I'm glad it's happening.
Yeah, for sure.
Agreed.
Same.
Yeah, and it is fantastic that whether on PC, whether on modern consoles, whether on handhelds, we're getting a lot of older titles that someone might have missed, someone might not have been alive for, that we slept on way back when, but it's coming back. Are there any titles or series that you really wish would like get a boost, get a remake, get a port that makes it easier to get your hands on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A couple of like kind of top contenders for a while. I wanted Resident Evil 4 on everything, and it kind of is now, and it will be again. And I remember, I guess it was 2 years ago, or maybe it was last year. I think it was last year. Dark Souls on Switch. I'm a huge Dark Souls guy, and I remember like tweeting. I was like, "Is it too much to ask just to have Dark Souls on Switch?" And I think like a week later they announced it, and I was like, "Wow, I am Nostradamus." But it's cool, you know. I think it's cool because like everything is a possibility now. You know what I mean? Like for example, I recently started playing maybe 4 or 5 months ago Symphony of the Night on an emulator on my computer, and then more recently, like it randomly dropped on cell phones. Like it's a game that I can play on my phone now, and it's so cool to just be able to be like, wow, like this game that I didn't play growing up, but then I got really into as an adult is now like in my pocket 24/7.
As a PS1 kid myself, the fact that our cell phones can run PS1 games now is
nuts, man. It's nuts.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I remember having that moment for the first time when the DS came out, and one of the launch titles was Super Mario 64 DS. And like, the N64 was the first console I remember like shaking my parents till I could get it. Like it was one of those consoles that was like I needed to have it. And I remember like coming home and playing Mario 64 for the first time, and just like the day disappeared. Like it was one of the most immersive experiences. So then to be able to put it on the DS and just take it with me, I went, this thing that needed to be attached to my TV is now in my hands. How does it work? What kind of magic is this? And like that kind of thing just keeps going. You talked about, you know, you being predicting Dark Souls coming to the Switch. I will yell into the ether until the end of time as a BioWare fan. They need to re-release the Mass Effect trilogy on everything. The fact that it hasn't is astonishing to me. But like, imagine playing an epic sci-fi trilogy like that on the Switch, on the go. Something that required one of the most powerful consoles at the time, the 360, to run even the first game. Being on a handheld now would be astonishing.
Totally. And like, even, you know, I look at like Doom 2016 on Switch, and I'm just like, this is just like, I have Doom wherever I want now. Like, that's incredible. And so,
on a Nintendo system too.
Yeah, it's nuts. And like everything is a possibility. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't be surprised if there are conversations about Mass Effect going on. And so like, it's a pretty awesome time for gamers, definitely.
Absolutely is. Well, before working at Bethesda, were you community manager for other companies elsewhere? How did you get your way to where you are now?
Yeah, it's sort of a weird road. So I grew up in Boston, but I moved to the DC area about 7 years ago. And I initially came down here to like work in politics. I studied political science, and I was like, I'm going to go make a difference. And then I moved down here and I was like, never mind. And then I immediately kind of started working in the tech startup scene. And all of the jobs I had and all of my roles were very like kind of outward facing and kind of like business relations focused. And they were like kind of people jobs. And I really enjoyed that. Most recently, right kind of before Bethesda, I worked at a coding school. And so I managed the DC campus of a coding boot camp that was based in New York City. And so a lot of my job was talking to students and talking to their parents and talking to teachers and hiring new teachers. And so I was constantly just communicating with people, and I really, really loved it. And then sort of through that, one of my coworkers at the time, and then also a friend of mine from college, we started a video games podcast. And I kind of, I joked with them, but I was also trying to be transparent. I called it my Trojan horse because I said I was going to push it into the video games industry and jump out and trick someone into hiring me. And I just put so much time into the podcast, and we had a small team of writers, and, we had like a website with reviews and stuff. And it taught me a lot about how to like market myself in an industry that I wanted to break into. And then I guess fast forward to, I think it was PAX West 2017. And it was right. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with The Messenger from Sabotage.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
That was my game of the year that came out.
It's
I just kickstarted their new game.
Same. Yeah, I did too. And it looks amazing.
A slight sidetrack, but relevant. Like that game had one of the best 8-bit to 16-bit soundtracks I've
incredible.
ever heard.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's astonishing. I actually just recorded an episode of my friend's podcast, Dinosaur Machines Game Club podcast, which is a bi-weekly like book club, but for video games.
Sure.
And they mentioned that they were going to do The Messenger, and I was like, oh my God, you have to have me on, like knocking down their door. But yeah, that's easily one of the best side-scrolling action games I think ever released.
Completely agreed. So I was actually covering the development of The Messenger for our website. So I guess PAX East 2017 is when I met Thierry, who's the the founder of Sabotage Studio, and we became real close at PAX East, and I did an interview with him there. And then my friend Steve and I, we both went to, actually, I guess PAX West was just me that year. So I went to Seattle, and they were launching The Messenger that same weekend. And I'd been talking with Thierry and his team, and he was like, "Yeah, man, like come by. We'll do an interview. Like come to our launch party." Just the nicest folks. And I met Rainbow Dragon Eyes Eric. He's a good friend of mine now. The guy who did the soundtrack.
Cool.
And I just became like completely. I don't know. It was this really cool moment where I was like, "Oh my God!" Like here I am, like fucking no one with a microphone. Like I didn't have any credentials. Like I was just a guy with a dumb website. And this, the Sabotage team was so welcoming and so friendly. And actually, in my little studio here at my apartment, I have one of their Sabotage T-shirts just framed on my wall because I look at that kind of time in my life as like what really helped push me into the industry. And so I covered their launch and we made some really awesome content from that weekend. And in that same weekend, actually, I went to Bethesda Game Days in Seattle. And I met who is now my boss, Jason. He's a wonderful man. And I kind of just like, I don't know, got in his face. Not in like a mean way, but I was like, hey, like I'm Manny. and like one of my favorite kind of, I don't know, tricks to employ when I'm interested in working somewhere is to just be like, what do you do? Like, tell me about your job. I want to know your sort of journey. And Jason was super kind. He gave like all the time of day and consideration to my ridiculous questions, and really just a wonderful guy. And kind of like, yeah, one thing led to another. And I remember I was on Twitter at like 1 a.m, some random night. And I had actually just gotten laid off from that coding bootcamp that I mentioned earlier. And I'm kind of like bumming around, and I'm just like looking at social media, and I see Katie Teague, who's a designer for id Software. She tweeted about some job openings at Bethesda, and I had already applied to like a couple jobs, maybe 2 or 3 that year, and didn't hear back. And then I saw this position open, and at like 1 a.m, I submitted my application. And yeah, one thing kind of led to another. I think it was good that I had met some folks at the event prior, just so they could kind of remember my name or my face. And after a couple months, yeah, I started just around Fallout 76. So it's kind of like this, I don't know, meandering long path, if you will. But it was a super fun time, and I'm happy the way things turned out.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've ended up exactly where you want to be.
Yeah, it's super interesting, man. Like, I don't know. I think there's a common misconception that like it's you have to be lucky. And while I agree, I think like timing was helpful for me. I think that I don't know. I'm a big kind of fan of the concept of like building your own luck. I couldn't have gotten lucky if I didn't pay the money to go to PAX West, if I didn't work really hard on that podcast and get interviews with Thierry and edit all these videos and stuff like that. So I think like if you manipulate your circumstances such that you can take advantage of luck once it shows up, then you can be in a much better position. And so I kind of just reminded myself of that a lot as I was trying to produce content, and it was super helpful. And I'm really grateful with how things played out.
Yeah, I find that like just again from like PAX East was my first real experience trying to cover an event, going as a panelist, having my own panel, like all of that stuff. It turns out that a lot of folks in that scene like just want to meet other folks who are passionate in that scene. Like it all boils down to that. And that kind of blew me away in a way I wasn't expecting. Like I didn't imagine that everyone in games were douchebags. Like I knew that wasn't true. But I just assumed like it was kind of like you make your own luck. Like there was a long time where I felt like, oh, I can't do that. Like everyone else can, but surely not me. I'm not part of that thing. And then like you meet all these people and you're like, oh, everyone else just wants to celebrate this thing we all love.
Totally.
And if as long as you're not a total D-bag, like people will want to celebrate that with you.
And like, you said like, I'm just me. Like everyone in the industry is also that. We're just that person. We're the same fucking people. It's just that we have like a job that requires us to like not talk about things if they're not announced. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it is a small industry, surprisingly small. And like, one of the cool things is like, if you're a dick and if you do something mean or you're just generally not cool, like everyone will know and they'll make sure everyone knows. And I think that's great because it's kind of like we're protecting our own community, like as industry people and as industry adjacent people. One of the, it's funny, I reached out to this guy named Aaron Kaufman. He now works at Square Enix. He was a former, I think his title is Senior Community Lead or something like that at Sony Santa Monica. And I just randomly DM'd him like a couple weeks before God of War came out. And I was like, hey, I just want to know how you got to where you are. I'm super interested in working in the industry. I'd love to know your experience, etc. And he was essentially like, okay, here's my phone number. God of War comes out in 2 weeks. Like text me in like 2 months. So I saved his number and I set an alert on my calendar for 2 months from that day.
Yes.
And I texted him and he's such a wonderful guy. We ended up talking for like hours. And he told me his story and he gave me some advice. And this was fairly early on, before I really tried to push myself into the industry. But he ended up, he's like a good friend of mine now and we chat all the time. And actually he helped me. I called him the day before my in-person interview at Bethesda, and he was so helpful. And it's people like him who recognize that like everyone is just trying to do good, and everyone is trying to do what makes them happy. And he was like, yeah, man, like somebody did it for me, and that now to have the opportunity to help you is great. And so he's been super helpful and inspirational, and like that's everyone here is exactly to your point, Matt. It's just like we're all here to celebrate that good. It's just that some of us have to sign NDAs,
This is fair.
Yeah, and paying it forward I think is super important, right? Like I definitely have very little status in the gaming community, but what little status I have, I try and always pay it forward. And like folks I've met always seem to do the same. And I've been associated with other industries in the arts, and there is some of that, but I feel like the gaming community is the one where that really happens the most. Like we're all people who love games and want to pay it forward. And if you want to make the time and work hard, they want to support you. And I think that's really 100%. Unlike any other industry.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, I've never been part of like the film industry or something, but like, I feel like a lot of these creative industries are really cutthroat. And like, it's like, everyone's on the same team until they're pushing for the same position or they want the same recognition. And in the games industry, it's the opposite. It's like, no, we're all in this boat. Let's all row in the same direction. And so you're right. Like it's very, it's a very team focused kind of thing.
Shifting the conversation back to video games, those things that we're here to talk about.
Yes.
Yes, the video games. Do you have any titles that you're looking forward to that are coming out? I know a lot of stuff has kind of been put on hold or canceled or pushed back.
Yeah.
But are there any games, even if they're not coming out anytime soon, that you're looking forward to playing that are on the horizon, as it were?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I'm always like in the midst of being like super hyped about a game, like all the time.
Nice.
So a few that come to mind, man, I'll tell you what, Senua's Sacrifice, Hellblade 2. I feel like that trailer we saw, I think it was at the Game Awards last year, is just burnt into my mind. Like that was one of the most unsettling but like beautiful things I'd ever seen. Like that was amazing. And I'm actually only now playing through Hellblade, the first one. And it's such an incredible experience. So I'm super looking forward to that. There's indie titles like Sea of Stars from Sabotage. I'm super stoked for that.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And let me think, what else? It's weird because I feel like in this, I don't know, I feel like we're living in like a very like TBD era right now. Like everything is just like suspended in midair. I'm like losing track of like what is even on the horizon. But Cyberpunk, super looking forward to that. I think that'll be really incredible. I guess some smaller game like Streets of Rage, I think is coming. The second one is coming, or Streets of Rage 4.
I think it's 4, yeah.
One.
Yeah, I think that's coming out later this month. So I think it's a cool time to get into these smaller titles that are coming out. And now with, I don't know, I feel like the Switch is such an easy. It's like this little like indie game machine for me in a lot of ways, and so it's cool to be excited about those smaller titles as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Geoff and I have talked about many times that our Switches have become our Steam libraries. Like that,
totally.
It's so easy to buy awesome indie games at a low price that you end up having, and you can have a ton of storage on the Switch with the micro SDs. That it's like, oh, I have 20 indie games and I haven't played half of them yet. How did this happen?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, between that and the fact that it's also the Switch is great for this current like TBD feeling time, because a lot of things that have kind of rolled their way onto it, some of them are new, some of them it's like, Dark Souls came out on the Switch years after the first one came out, but it still felt fresh and exciting.
Right.
And like we're getting so many new old titles. It's perfect for these days.
It really is.
But one thing I'd like to ask, it's great to hear the games you're excited about now, and we're talking a bit about community and everything else and panels. If you could give like a TED Talk PowerPoint, let me show you my theories about any game that's ever come out, any game series, do you have one in particular you would want to like?
I love that question.
Get at with people.
I think it would be a hard tie. Actually, that's not true. I would go with Dark Souls. Yeah, for sure.
Word.
Dark Souls, it's so deep and it's incredible. And it's funny. When I graduated college, I moved in with my sister and brother-in-law because I was like, living with mom again? No, thank you. And
right.
He had Dark Souls on, I think, the 360. And he's like, hey, man, try this game. And I was like, okay. And I played maybe 10 minutes of it. I was like, this is dumb. I'm going to play a different game. And years later, he mailed me the copy of Dark Souls. And this was maybe, I don't know, 5 years after that. And he was like, hey, man, you're a little older now. Like, just try this game again. And I did. And I got like completely lost in it and totally engrossed in this like super challenging world where the story is just told in the environment and item descriptions. And it's totally like take it or leave it kind of thing. And it was it was a really awesome thing that got me and my brother-in-law super close, and we're like fucking best friends now. He's a wonderful man, and I have a Dark Souls tattoo, and I could talk about it for days and days and days. At work, I have on a shelf above my desk, I call it my shrine, and it's just like this, I don't know, 3 foot by 2 foot shelf, and it's just covered in Dark Souls stuff, like the Japanese collector's edition of Dark Souls 2, which no one liked, but I love, and like just all these silly things like figures and books, and so yeah, it would probably be a really long and frankly probably pretty boring TED Talk about the universe of Dark Souls. Yeah,
but it's also one of those series that it may seem boring to you, or you feel like it would be boring, but I think the people that came there want exactly that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's so much like content out there, like, especially on YouTube. You can watch like full-length documentaries that were made by community members about like why this random god from Dark Souls and like who only shows up in like a statue in Dark Souls 1 or something like. There's some really awesome stuff out there. So yeah, you're right. It would serve a need for some folks for sure.
Yeah.
So I want to bring the conversation back to Doom really quick because I want to talk about one of my favorite things, which I mentioned on the show several times. Playing through Doom 2016, and I'm sure I'll love it in Eternal when I play it, is the glory kills. The glory kills are exactly what 8-year-old Matt, who loves gore and ridiculous comics and TV, wants to see in Doom. Totally. Do you have a favorite glory kill? I know that's like choosing between your favorite children, but like for me, I'll give mine and then you can give yours. In Doom Eternal, when you glory kill a cacodemon, it makes a Warner Brothers cartoon sounding pop as you pluck their eye out.
Yeah.
And like that to me hits me on so many levels because it's just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
That happens to probably be one of my favorites.
For sure. It's it is like choosing between children, like really violent children.
Really violent children.
So middle schoolers.
Yeah, exactly. Sixth graders.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like I remember early on, when Doom was kind of still in development, and like every time we would test the game, there'd be a new glory kill that was added, and it was like watching like a new amazing sports moment. Like people would stand up and be like, "Oh my god, this is incredible!" And so like it was so cool to just see those glory kills like slowly trickle out of the dev team. I think my favorite glory kill, man, that's hard. I'm like, and it's wild too, because it depends who you're killing, and it depends what angle you approach them at, and it depends on like so many things. I'm trying to recall all of them, but I think one of my favorites, and it's kind of a fan favorite as well, is if you're glory killing a Hell Knight, if I remember correctly, in Eternal, you can kind of pop their, I guess, I'm looking at my own arm and trying to identify the bones that are in it. You kind of pop their elbow bone out of their arm, and then you stab them in the head with it.
Yes.
And so it's this, and there's another one that's pretty similar. If you glory kill a Whiplash, you kind of just take their claw and just like jam it into their own face. And so those like kind of unexpected ones I think are cool. There's one of the Marauder as well, where you go to punch him and he stops your hand with his hand, and you kind of struggle for a moment, and then you pop the Doom Blade out of that hand that he's holding, and it just hits him in the head. And so it's like a kind of like little plot twist kind of glory kills that I really enjoy. Yeah.
I think a highlight of me playing the first game is when I started finding the little statues, the little like Doom guy figures.
Yeah.
And like he did the Baymax ba-la-la-la-la,
Yeah.
like when he fist bumps it.
Yep.
Like little things like that are great, and nods to other games are great. Would you guys have Easter eggs all over the place? Is that a conscious decision? It must be. I mean, the dev team must want to just share their love of games within this game.
For sure. And you look at Hugo Martin, creative director at id, and like the guy is an encyclopedia of pop culture. Like if you guys haven't had a chance to watch the No Clip documentaries about Doom, there's a lot of interviews with Hugo Martin in that, and the dude, his energy is just infectious. He used to do stand-up comedy, so he just kind of knows how to like perform, and he knows how to engage really, really well. And when you combine that with his love for pop culture, like he'll talk to you about RoboCop for like 3 hours, and you'll leave that conversation being like, I think I'm obsessed with RoboCop now. Like he's such a nerd, and he celebrates it so well. And so there's total nods and Easter eggs to different parts of pop culture. And he's such a creative genius. I mean, he worked with Guillermo del Toro for Pacific Rim. Like he designed a lot of the mechs, and so he's just kind of this powerhouse of creativity, and it bleeds through all of the games that he touches. And the team at id, like they're a bunch of wizards. Like they're actual, I'm convinced they're wizards that came from another world and brought us these beautiful games. But those little things, those little touches that you look at Eternal, and it's fast and it's violent and it's brutal, but it's also like it's a celebration. It's a celebration of older Doom titles. It's a celebration of just games in general, where it has fun with itself, and it reminds you that you are playing a game. And so there's all those little figures, and you pick up a little Doom guy figure, and that's one of my favorite moments in the game, is the little like he does a slightly different version of the fist bump kind of thing. He has this little moment where he's like, yeah, it's a toy, and it's just like, yeah, like I'm playing a game, and I'm playing a game that was made by people who love games. And so those touches, I think they serve a really, really good purpose in a game like Doom, in a franchise like Doom, for sure.
That's amazing. It's nice, yeah, all those little ways that you're able to send out the message in the bottle that, we love what we're doing too. You can put something in the background of a movie, but it's so much more rewarding when you search all the corners and nooks of this game that you love, this world that you love inhabiting, and finding little rewards, little nods, little things, more than just trophies and whatnot.
Yeah, it makes it more of like a two-way street rather than a one-way street. It's not just people playing a game. It's them interacting with it, and like this kind of it's like a conversation between you and really the devs, which is so cool.
Yeah, for sure. The last thing I wanted to ask you was, we're in a time, I mean, by the time this episode airs, who knows, maybe the apocalypse will be over.
Who knows, man?
Who knows? But for now, we're recording in a time of quarantine where there's less games coming out and we're all home a lot more. Are there any games in your backlog that you haven't touched that you're really excited to engage with, or older games that you haven't played that you're looking to buy that you passed over because you just didn't have the time and now you have more time to play them?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier I'm playing through Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, and man, that game is incredible. I don't know if you guys have played it, but it's such a powerful game.
I've played Heavenly Sword. I haven't gotten to Hellblade yet.
Okay, yeah, it's just remarkable. And I met when I was doing the podcast stuff. I met Melina Juergens, the one who she was just if I remember correctly, she was like a video assistant, and she kind of stepped in to help as the motion capture for Senua, and apparently she was so amazing that they were like, "No, you're Senua now, so that's your job."
That's incredible.
Yeah, and so that game has been really, really wonderful to get into. I'm actually replaying The Messenger. I'm going back and like playing the DLC. Picnic Panic has been super fun.
Nice.
And it's so
I love that DLC. Have you beaten the DLC yet?
No, so I haven't. I played through like 2/3 of it when it came out, and then now I'm like,
Okay.
oh well, I need to wrap this up.
I won't spoil it, but the final boss battle is the best boss battle in video games ever.
Oh my god, that's so exciting! I'm really looking forward to that.
It's just ridiculous. You'll have to message me once you get to it, because it was one of those things where I went, really? Awesome.
Yeah.
So
that's
I'm
rad.
curious to hear your
That's
thoughts.
rad. So yeah, it's like, and it's also just like a really good palate cleanser between like a super heavy game like Senua's Sacrifice or like, Dark Souls 3 or whatever. I'm replaying Dark Souls 3 with some friends, which has been really great. And then, yeah, I mean, I've replayed Doom Eternal, I think 4 times now since launch. And so, I've been doing, I'm not a speedrunner at all, and I don't know how to do that. I don't even know how, like, I also think they're wizards, but,
yeah, same.
Truth.
I think, it's cool to just pull different levers each time I play. And like, so for right now, I'm doing a nightmare run with no HUD. And it's just, it feels very pure. It's just like, oh my God, like everything on my screen is Doom. There's nothing that isn't like violence and speed. So that has been super fun. And then, yeah, I mean, like, I'm a huge fan, admittedly, of Quake. I'm actually wearing a Quake Pro League shirt right now. But, and so I've been like going back and like, playing Quake Live, and I play a lot of Quake Champions with some friends, and so like kind of going back to like my like FPS roots and being like, oh yeah, I remember this, has been a lot of fun. And of course, I've been playing Doom 64, which has been super good, and it's such a good time to like reach back into the backlog and like pull out some of these these old great games.
Yeah, getting all of the Doom library, Doom 1, 2, 3, and 64 on my Switch is in my near future. Yeah. I'm really excited to go back and play those. But I am someone who played Doom 2016, and probably on Eternal, I will play on the lowest difficulty because I'm just not great at those kinds of games. Sure. Now, I do appreciate that, like, you guys have made it so accessible for inexperienced shooter players to play those games.
Definitely.
That makes me so happy to go back and revisit the older ones too, to see if I can get any better at those as well. Because you let people get in on the ground floor, and then if they get better, then ramp it up, but there's no requirement.
Definitely. And that was super intentional. I mean, like, I remember conversations with the team way early on where they wanted to focus on letting people experience Doom, and the higher difficulties, it doesn't just turn things into bullet sponges. It doesn't just make things take more ammo to defeat. It just, they become like, the AI becomes smarter. And so I forget who wrote it. I want to say maybe Eurogamer or something. They described it as like a ballet of blood, but a ballet with brains or something like that.
Amazing.
And so like, it's an intelligent game the way it challenges you. But even, I mean, man, even at the lowest difficulty, like, the game will challenge you because it does require a lot of thinking. I think in Doom 2016, you can get away with, I mean, you can do a melee only run in 2016. And that's not to say it's necessarily a bad thing, but you certainly can't get away with that in Doom Eternal, because it forces you, it bends you and sometimes breaks you to play certain ways. And so every time you die, you know exactly why you died, and you learn from it, and you come back and you say, okay, I know what I did, so I won't make that mistake again.
It's the Dark Souls ethos.
Exactly, precisely. That's exactly it. And so it's like, how can we teach people who want to ramp it up and want to play on those higher difficulties, even on the lowest or lower difficulties, you're still learning so much.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable for me. Like, I mean, I told you offline, Manny, I'm going through this renaissance of rediscovering why I play first-person shooters and to really figure out whether I like them or not, because I've played a lot of shooter games, but I had this like weird block in my brain that I didn't like them, which is clearly not true. And Doom has been a huge part of that process. Wolfenstein as well. Like, oh, modern shooters give you the accessibility that maybe older ones didn't. So maybe while I didn't like older shooters because I felt like I would hit a wall, there's a level of accessibility that didn't exist before. And I think that's super important and key in a lot of games.
Definitely.
I'm not, and I know that like the Dark Souls crowd prefers the hard difficulty and they don't want that kind of accessibility. And that's not a conversation I really want to get into, because you could be on any side of that issue. People are passionate about it. I just think that when games do allow that accessibility of easier runs or different ways to get in, I think it helps everybody. And I'm super stoked that Doom and Doom Eternal both allowed for that.
Definitely. And, the more people we can bring in, then the stronger and more passionate the community will be. And I think, we look at a game like Doom, and even in the gameplay, the conversation of how can we cater to and welcome back old players, but also welcome new players. Like, the conversation is there, and you can see it in the gameplay. And so it's been really rewarding and really cool to have that conversation in so many different ways, whether it's like marketing campaign stuff or stream stuff or the gameplay itself. It's like, how can we like open our community up? It's been awesome.
Awesome. Well, Manny, thank you for taking the time to chat with us. This has been a blast.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me. This was super fun. Definitely.
And before we wrap up, I would love for you to tell people where they can find you, where they can get Doom Eternal. Of course, I'm sure it's available everywhere and on everything at this point, but like, plug your shit, as they say.
Yeah, definitely. I'm all over the place. I'm on Twitter too much. I'll say too much. I'm on Twitter too much. You can find me at IamJitsu. I post stupid things and as is tradition. And like go get Doom Eternal. It's fucking awesome. And join the Slayers Club, because that's also fucking awesome. But yeah, guys, thank you so much. This has been really awesome. And this is exactly that celebration of the good in gaming. So if I can keep it up, because you guys are doing great stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that love and sharing it from the other side of the industry. And thank you so much for mentioning the conversation, because that is what this is all about.
Yeah, I appreciate it, for sure.
No worries. Thank you. And listeners, let us know what side of the conversation you go on. Are any of you part of the Slayers Club? What's your favorite part of interacting with Bethesda or any other big company out there? How has the transparency of community been for you? Because whether it's on here or out there, this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Do you like movies?
Any movies. Old movies, new movies.
Bad movies.
Sad movies.
I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And I'm Rachel Corky Shank.
And together we host Screen Snark, a movie podcast for movie lovers by movie lovers.
It's a podcast dedicated to the movies that are in our eyes, on our minds, and in our hearts.
Featuring guests of a wide selection of entertainment backgrounds, performers, writers, creatives.
So please join us for the casual cinema conversation every other Monday wherever you get your podcasts.
And follow us on Twitter at @screen_snark, and we'll see you at the movies. All right, we're supposed to do that bit together.
That's cool.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.